A brief story about two Chinas. In 1945, the Republic of China, along with the other Allied powers, won World War II and was thus awarded a seat as a permanent member of the Security Council of the newly founded United Nations. But as soon as the war struggle against the Japanese was over, China found itself back into its civil conflict which had originally begun in the late 1920s, fought between the ruling Nationalist Party of China led by Chiang Kai-shek, often shortened as KMT, and the Communist Party of China, led by Mao Zedong. Long story short, the Communists won by conquering the entirety of mainland China, and on the 1st of October 1949, the People's Republic of China was proclaimed by Mao in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. 2 months later, on December 7, the nationalist government finished retreating to the island of Formosa, aka Taiwan, which had been under Japanese occupation during World War II. Here, Chiang Kai-shek declared Taipei to be the temporary capital of the Republic of China. In the meantime, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, unsuccessfully attempted to invade the island during the Battle of Gunning-2, in which the victory of the KMT ultimately crushed Mao's chances of unifying the entirety of China under the leadership of the Communist Party. And since then, China remains split between two governments, with their official names being to this day People's Republic of China and Republic of China, which from now on will be referring to as China and Taiwan respectively. The majority of the UN member states would initially keep recognizing Taiwan as the sole legitimate Chinese state, with it keeping its seat at the UN Security Council, but these conditions wouldn't last forever. First of all, you would expect a newly formed communist government to be friends with the USSR, and that was initially the case, as the two sides would go on to sign the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship in 1950. Still, ever since the beginning, it was clear that the two sides had differences, beginning with the fact that the USSR had so far been the undiscussed leader of the communist world, and that the other communist states worldwide were pretty much its satellites, except for a few rebels, that is. The Communist government of China was not a satellite, therefore the USSR could not dictate its policies, something which Stalin wasn't exactly cool with. But still, relations between the two were overall pretty stable, until Stalin died in 1953 and was replaced with Nikita Khrushchev, whom harshly condemned his predecessor's policies and commenced the process of de-Stalinization. It was under Khrushchev's leadership that the relations between the USSR and China reached an all-time low. Mao, who had been inspired by Stalin's leadership style, wasn't content with de-Stalinization, and heavily criticized Khrushchev's policy of peaceful coexistence with the West. He instead advocated for a confrontational stance against Western powers, a difference in views which culminated in the Sino-Soviet split. In 1961, Mao denounced Soviet communism as revisionist and social imperialist, and in 1962, after Khrushchev's refusal to go to war with the US over the Cuban Missile Crisis, China officially broke relations with the Soviet Union. One country that notably followed China's lead in communism was Albania, which also broke relations with the USSR and withdrew from the Warsaw Pact. The communist world was now even more divided than before, with an additional player not just disagreeing with the views of the USSR like Yugoslavia, but even contending the lead of the bloc. Despite that, most communist countries in the world would remain aligned with the USSR in the years to come, including other Far Eastern countries like Vietnam. But this isolation of China would slowly come to an end. In 1971, with the communist regime having ruled China for over 20 years, 17 countries led by Albania introduced Resolution 2758 to the UN General Assembly, calling for the expulsion of the representatives of the Republic of China aka Taiwan at the UN, and the replacement with the representatives of the People's Republic of China. With 75 votes in favor, 35 against, and 17 abstentions, the resolution was adopted, and China took over the seat of Taiwan at the UN, along with its status as a member of the Permanent Security Council. Despite this, the US still refused to recognize the Communist government of China and remained supportive of Taiwan. But this was also bound to change. Henry Kissinger, who by the way happens to have died recently, at the time National Security Advisor to the President, went on a secret trip to Beijing after some American ping pong athletes visited China with approval of Mao, making them the first Americans to officially visit China since the Communist takeover. Both countries had an interest in improving relations with each other as both shared a common enemy which they perceived as the biggest threat to their security, the USSR, against which China had recently even fought a border conflict. Shortly after Kissinger's return from his secret trip to China, Nixon announced his own visit to China, where he would meet with Mao Zedong and eventually sign the Shanghai Communique, in which the US formally acknowledged, and I underline acknowledged, that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain that there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. By using the word acknowledges, the Nixon administration pursued a policy often regarded as strategic ambiguity, as acknowledging differs from recognizing in legal terms. The US kept in fact recognizing the government of Taiwan as the legal representative of China, as no countries might ever recognize both Chinas as they both claimed to be the only Chinese state, and neither would accept the recognition of the other. This mechanism is known as the One China policy. The Shanghai Communique marked the beginning of the normalization process between the US and China, which would culminate in the formal recognition of the People's Republic of China by the US in 1979, with the joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations. Here, the US once again played the card of strategic ambiguity, recognizing the government of the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government of China, but only acknowledging the Chinese position that there is but one China and that Taiwan is part of China. But unfortunately for the US, China didn't play along, as in the Chinese version of the communique, the same verb used to translate the word recognizes was used to translate the word acknowledges, making it more appealing to the interests of the Chinese government. Over the years, more and more countries switched recognition from Taiwan to China, with the government of Honduras having made the switch the most recently, in March 2023. Nowadays, Taiwan only has formal diplomatic relations with 12 countries and the Holy See, the governing body of the Vatican City, but this did not prevent it from maintaining informal relations with 59 countries, including the US, which is one of its largest trading partners and even provided it with military aid in 2023. In 2022, President Joe Biden even vowed to defend Taiwan in the case of a Chinese invasion. Therefore, the US stance on Taiwan might be summarized as, "We don't recognize it, but we don't recognize your claim on it either, so don't you dare touch it." Despite how frustrating its history might have been, Taiwan is today considered one of the most advanced democracies in the world, having begun its transition to democracy in 1987, when President Chiang Kai-shek, the son of Chiang Kai-shek, ended the nation's almost 40-year-long enforcement of the martial law. The transition ended in 1996, the year in which the first direct presidential election took place in the country. Since then, the people of Taiwan have been creating an increasingly distinctive national identity, which effectively made Taiwan the other face of China, rejecting the values of its communist counterpart, like authoritarianism and oppression of civil rights and liberties, in favor of a strong love for democracy and civil rights and liberties. For instance, in 2019, Taiwan became the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage, followed by Nepal in 2023. All of this increasingly distanced the people of Taiwan from the ones living in mainland China, making reunification with the government of Beijing less and less appealing.